when the host of a private dinner in a Bel Air mansion smirked and said, "You young women today wouldn't last a day under real discipline. The military would break you." I didn't interrupt him. I just took a slow sip of ice water and let him enjoy his own voice. He spent the next 20 minutes lecturing me on military tactics, supply chains, and leadership as if he'd invented them, completely unaware that the woman sitting across from him in a casual silk blouse didn't just understand military discipline, she lived it. What he mistook for a naive, quiet girlfriend was actually a military commander responsible for thousands of lives and millions in defense logistics. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Colonel Naomi Ward. I am 46 years old and serve as an active-duty colonel in the United States Army, currently commanding a combat sustainment brigade. To the outside world, I am a military leader accustomed to managing thousands of personnel, complex logistics, and high-stakes operations. But on this particular evening, stripped of my uniform, ribbons, and insignia, I was just Naomi, wearing a tailored silk dress and walking into an ultra-exclusive estate in the hills of Bel Air. I was there to meet my boyfriend Julian's father, Richard Sterling. Richard was a multi-millionaire real estate mogul and defense contractor known in elite circles for his fierce ambition and razor-sharp tongue. Before we even stepped through the massive wrought iron gates of the estate, Julian turned to me with a nervous smile and squeezed my hand. He begged me to keep my military background quiet for the night. Julian explained that his father was a man who needed to be the smartest, most powerful authority figure in every room, especially when it came to topics like business, politics, and national security. He warned me that Richard often felt intimidated by high-achieving women and that keeping things simple would make the dinner go much smoother. Wanting to support Julian and avoid unnecessary family drama, I agreed. I decided I would play the role of the quiet, supportive girlfriend, letting Richard enjoy his spotlight while I observed from across the table. I had no idea just how far he would test my patience. The dining room was a showcase of pure wealth. Soaring ceilings, a crystal chandelier, and a mahogany table long enough to seat 20 people. Richard Sterling sat at the head of it like a monarch on a throne. He was a man in his late 60s with silver hair, sharp features, and a booming voice that left no room for interruption. Beside him sat his third wife, a soft-spoken woman who barely spoke, and Julian sat across from me, looking visibly anxious every time his father cleared his throat. As the second course was served, Richard began his performance. He launched into a grand monologue about his business empire, taking every opportunity to drop the names of politicians, high-ranking executives, and Defense Department officials he claimed to have on speed dial. His demeanor toward me was patronizing from the moment we sat down. Glancing at my soft-spoken manner and simple silk dress, he clearly pegged me as just another young, passive woman depending on his son for a lavish lifestyle. Then, the topic turned. Richard brought up a recent military logistics operation that had been dominating the news headlines, a complex multinational supply initiative in Western Europe. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine, and started lecturing me with absolute, unearned confidence. He spoke with condescending authority, making glaring errors about military hierarchy, operational readiness, and strategic deployment. He explained chain-of-command structures as if he were explaining basic math to a toddler, completely unaware that the woman listening was currently responsible for those exact operations. Richard's lecture quickly shifted from military logistics to a personal critique of modern society. He gestured at me with his fork, his tone dripping with condescension. "The problem with your generation, Naomi, especially women, is that you've never experienced real pressure. You live in a world of comfort. Someone like you wouldn't last 48 hours under actual military discipline. You'd break the second a real leader gave you a command." World-class discipline meant keeping my face entirely blank, but under the table my fingers tightened around my napkin. Julian caught my eye, his expression filled with silent desperation. He gave me a pleading look, wordlessly begging me to just smile, nod, and swallow the insults. He was terrified that any conflict would ruin his relationship with his father and torpedo his standing in the family business. Out of respect for Julian, I forced myself to maintain complete military composure. I sat back, took a slow sip of my water, and listened as Richard continued to dig himself deeper. He rambled on about how a brigade operates, completely butchering the responsibilities of a commanding officer, misidentifying tactical readiness protocols, and conflating basic enlisted duties with strategic command. Every single sentence out of his mouth was factually wrong, delivered with the supreme arrogance of a man who had never served a day in his life, yet believed his money made him an expert on everything. Richard set his wine glass down with a heavy clink and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The smirk on his face made it clear he thought he was about to deliver a knockout blow to my intelligence. "Tell me, Naomi," he said, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "Since you seem so quiet over there, do you even know what a defense procurement contract looks like? Or do you just assume the military operates on goodwill and magic?" He gave a short, booming laugh, clearly expecting me to fumble or look to Julian for help. Before I could offer a calm response, the grand double doors of the dining room swung open. Richard's butler stepped into the room, looking flustered. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize for the interruption, but General Thomas has just arrived." Richard's entire posture transformed instantly. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a desperate, eager energy. General Marcus Thomas was a high-ranking retired three-star general who sat on the advisory board of the very defense contracting firm Richard was trying to partner with. Securing this military contract meant tens of millions of dollars for Richard's business, and he had been pursuing General Thomas for months. "Ah, Marcus! Perfect timing!" Richard called out, standing up quickly and smoothing his designer jacket as he stepped toward the doorway. "We were just having a fascinating discussion about military efficiency. Please, come join us." General Thomas walked into the dining room, looking sharp and authoritative in his tailored suit. He began to smile politely at Richard, but as his eyes swept across the room and landed on me sitting at the far end of the table, he stopped dead in his tracks. General Thomas's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Without missing a beat, the retired three-star general completely ignored Richard's outstretched hand, brought his heels together, and snapped into a crisp, immaculate military salute. "Colonel Ward," he announced, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room with absolute authority. "I certainly didn't expect to run into you in Bel Air. I thought you were back at the base overseeing the brigade's readiness evaluations." I stood up, returned his salute with a composed, practiced movement, and smiled warmly. "General Thomas. Good to see you, sir. I'm taking a brief weekend leave." Richard stood frozen midway across the floor, his hand still floating uselessly in the air. His jaw was slightly open, his face draining of color as his mind struggled to process what was happening. "Marcus. Wait," Richard stammered, pointing a trembling finger toward me. "You know Naomi? She's Julian's girlfriend." General Thomas chuckled, shaking his head at Richard's ignorance. "Girlfriend?" "Richard, you are looking at Colonel Naomi Ward, one of the sharpest logistics officers in the United States Army. She commands a combat sustainment brigade of over 4,000 troops. In fact, her unit is the primary authority reviewing the defense supply proposal your firm submitted last week." The silence in the room became absolute. Julian's mouth dropped open, looking between me and his father in shock. Richard's face turned from pale white to a deep, embarrassed red. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The quiet, submissive woman he had spent the last hour patronizing, insulting, and trying to humiliate was actually the high-ranking commander who held the single signature required to approve or destroy his multi-million-dollar military contract. He looked at me, his eyes wide with pure panic, as the balance of power in the room shattered completely. I took a deliberate step forward, looking directly into Richard's wide, panicked eyes. Without raising my voice, I addressed every single mistake he had made during his lecture. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my tone smooth, controlled, and sharp as a razor. "To correct your earlier assessment, a sustainment brigade does not operate on magic. We manage 4 battalion-level commands, coordinate continuous multimodal transit corridors across 2 continents, and oversee $300 million in heavy material logistics. Furthermore, our procurement review process prioritizes operational integrity over political connections." Richard looked as though he were choking on his own pride. He cleared his throat frantically, his confident, booming demeanor completely shattered. "Colonel Ward," he stammered, his hands visibly shaking as he tried to adjust his tie. I had no idea. Please accept my deepest apologies. I was merely speaking in general terms earlier, of course. I hold the military in the highest regard, especially leaders of your extraordinary stature." He took a step toward me, desperately trying to salvage his reputation and his defense contract. He attempted to pivot into flatteries, offering me the best seat at the table and personally pouring my wine. I held up a single hand, stopping him in his tracks. "True leadership," I said quietly, "is demonstrated by how you treat people when you think they hold no power over you. Good evening, gentlemen." I turned smoothly on my heel, leaving Richard standing frozen in his own dining room. Julian walked me out to my car in total silence, his eyes wide with a newfound sense of awe and deep respect. He had never seen his father, a man who spent his life dominating everyone around him, humbled so instantly and completely. That night was a powerful reminder that true authority never needs to shout, boast, or put others down to make its presence felt. Quiet confidence and real capability will always speak louder than arrogance. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story today. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have corrected him right away, or waited for the perfect moment? Comment below and let me know. Be sure to like, subscribe, and click the video on your screen right now for another amazing story you definitely won't want to miss.